Здраво, Македонија! Добре дојдовте во вечерното шоу. Започнуваме со ексклузивна вест дека после нападот над македонскиот поп Никодим Царкњас во Грција, министерот Бујар Османи отиде да се сретне со него и да ја искаже нашата и неговата поддршка. Хе, виц! Нормално дека Бујар не отиде да се сретне со Никодим Царкњас, како што беше да се сретне со Христијан Пендиков, например. Туку отиде во Чаир да држи беседи за албанските успеси во Македонија.
Дојде пред президентите штетите целиот консензуар да одвеч уштрим ербул е целашна джунши. Sot kemi parlament që 6 vitet e fundit udhëhiqet në Shqip. Jo flitesh në Shqip, udhëhiqet në Shqip. Në fakt kemi 3 parlamente që tani udhëhiqen në Shqip. Kemi qeveri në cilën për disa muaj të presin kryeministrin e bashkëtor. Kemi 18 ministra në qeveri, nga cilët 9 prej tyre janë shqiptar.
И не е само ова. Бујар додаде дека живееле преужасно, без јазик, без култура, без знаме, без ништо. Фактички, огромна тортура сме им вршеле, од која денес се ослободени и јако еманципирани.
Kujtohuni pak, kemi qenë jashtë shkollave, jashtë universiteteve, jashtë spitaleve, jashtë sporteleve të administratës. Kemi pas një polici, një etnike që i trajnonte policët e ri на шпинен е шипта.
Должен не остане и Артан Груби Неделава, кој исто така ја опишува слободата што денес ја има и ја ужива во Македонија.
Është qeverisur me politika të frikës, në veçanti nga konservatorja demokristiane VMRO DPMN. Frikë nga bullgarët, sepse dua marrin gjuhën, kulturën, identitetin, historinë, frikë nga shqiptarët se do e marrin shtetin e do e bëjnë Shqipëri, frikë nga Greqia se dua merr historinë dhe Aleksandrin e Madh dhe Maqedoninë antike dhe emrin e shtetit, frikë nga Serbia se do e konsideron këtë Južna Banovina, pjesë të Serbisë, siç ka qenë në një pjesë të historisë. Dhe duke instaluar këto politikat frikës, e sjellim votën nacionaliste, ekstremiste, konservatore tek vetvetja nga gjitha këto frika. Dhe thonë, na votoni neve, se ne nuk do t'i lejojmë këto fqinj tanë që t'i realizojnë aspiratat tyre ndaj Maqedonasve. Dhe kjo frikë në fakt është status quo. Dhe çdo status quo
Тој е слободен, но затоа живееле во страв македонците. Но тој и неговиот шеф докажале дека не треба да се плашиме. И навистина, од што бе да се плашиме? Па не е дека 2001 година имавме војна и напади меѓу другото и од Косово, или пак дека го сменивме името поради Грција, или пак дека сега Бугарија не тера да напишеме дека имаме заеднички корен. Нема од што да се плашиме ако сме албанци како Артан Груби. Ако сме, и еден автопат ќе биде прикажуван како особена придобивка лично за нас.
Cila është rëndësia e Prilep Manastir?
Edhe këtu jetojnë shqiptarë, din në Prilep, komunën e Dollnenit, në Manastir, kongresi i Manastirit, dhe kjo bëhet lidhshmëria me Greqinë, këtu në vendkalimin kufitar me Gjitlia, dhe me këtë përfundojnë të gjitha nyjet e autostradave në Maqedoninë e Veriut.
Ulemi, Artan, faleminderit.
Ете, тоа е накратко објаснувањето за автопатите. ВМРО се елустрав дека ќе се сменело името и така натака. Штета што не објасни Артан како фабрика за долен веш ќе го надледува овој проект кој чини повеќе од 1,6 милиарди евра. Ама не прашувајте многу прашања на оваа тема, бидејќи ако го правите тоа, вие ќе сте анти-албанци. Купете си макарони или шпагети и уживајте во богатството.
Во улога на пазарни инспектори, премиерот Ковачевски и министерот Бектеши излегоа да проверат дали тестенините, млекото и млечните производи од денеска се со намалени цени. Откако ги провери сумите испишани на рафтовите, Ковачевски ја заврши домашната обврска. Си купи леп макарони и млеко, но и се заблажи.
Да, дежурниот забавувач во владата беше во инспекција на терен да провери дали макароните поевтиниле за 4 денари, за да прогласи уште еден голем успех на владата. При тоа и пазарел за дома. Но овој прилог на Телма не ја кажа целата вистина.
Си купи леп макарони и млеко, но и се заблажи.
Така е, не си купи само леп, макарони и млеко, туку и
леп, сирење, макарони и урда се најдоа во курпата за пазарење кај премиерот Ковачевски. Урда.
Така е, купи и урда, бидејќи се спремаше за вечерното шоу во петок. А секој петок урда јадат. И Ковачевски, и Бектеши, и цела влада. Секој петок урда јадат. Докажано и пред камери. Видовте самите што купија. Веќе знаете дека Ковачевски ваквите промотивни настани ги спонзорира на Facebook и минатата недела дознаме дека плаќал 260 евра на ден или 26.000 евра за 100 дена само за бустирање и за рекламирање на Facebook. Тоа ви звучеше многу. Епа подгответе се за следната информација.
2 дена, на 30 и 31 јануари, премиерот, министри, заменици министри, директори, академици, советници и експерти учествуваа на 8 панел дискусии посветени на различни теми. Но трошоците за мега настанот се чуваа во тајност. Ниту тогаш премиерот Ковачевски не сакаше да открие колку граѓаните ќе платат за конференцијата.
Не можам да ви кажам, бидејќи тоа го прават службите, но секако дека ќе комуницираат од кога ќе заврши.
Граѓаните од државниот буџет за дводневната конференција платиле вртоглави 168.000 евра. 168.000 евра. 168.000 евра.
168.000 евра. Епа што? Па парили се 168.000 евра за 2 дена конференција. И внимавајте на што се потрошени.
Парите завршиле во 2 компании и тоа за 3 ставки. Најголем дел од парите биле дадени за организацијата на настанот, односно за озвучување, осветлување, паноа и слично. Организатор била компанијата Фонолукс, која за овие услуги наплатила 148.000 евра. За озвучување, осветлување, паноа и слично, 148.000 евра.
Лайк? За озвучување на конференција во хотел и за лед екрани и за осветлување 148.000 евра. Па концерт на Rolling Stones чини помалку да го озвучиш и да го осветлиш. Но, што е со храната? Ајде да видиме колку платиле овие што секој петок курда јадат.
Угостителските услуги и закупот на конференциската сала одело преку компанијата Ноа Турс, за што биле платени речиси 20.000 евра, од кои 6.800 за угостителските услуги, а остатокот за закупот на конференциската сала.
Ете, изеле само 7.000 евра, ама тоа беше пред урдата да поевтини. Ако поевтинеше порано едно 4.000 евра, сигурно ќе заштедевме сите како народ, бидејќи овие луѓе секој петок урда јадат. Океј, тоа беше прегледот на последните активности на домашната сцена. Одиме на меѓународната, а таму се случи чудо. Ако видовте некој пцовисано магаре по улици деновиве, не чудете се. Стево Пендаровски имаше напад на патриотизам.
Свежо разбудениот патриотизам на Пендаровски ги разгневи бугарските националисти. Откако председателот за смирување на страстите меѓу Македонија и Бугарија побара извинување за улогата на профашистичката влада во Софија за депортацијата на македонските евреи. Гласноговорниците за негација на македонскиот народ се разжестија.
Што симпатично звучи ова во прилогот. Свежо разбудениот патриотизам на Пендаровски. Жено, извади го патриотизмот од замрзивач, ќе ни доаѓаат гости. Овој напад Пендаровски го имаше на 11 март, денот на депортацијата на македонските евреи во време на бугарската фашистичка окупација на Македонија во 1943 година. 80 години подосна, нашите источни соседи не само што не собрале сила да се извинат за соучеството во геноцидот на евреите, туку уште и сила покажуваат.
Бугарскиот председател има одржа лекција по историја и на останатите македонски политичари.
Интересът на президента на Република Северна Македонија към историјата е похвален, но веднъж заявен. Той трябва да се опира на историческата истина. И политиците в нашата съседка все още дължат на собствените си граждани истината за тяхната собствена история. История, която е в десетилетна обвивка от манипулации и фалшификации. Истината за еврейския въпрос. Истината за гоненията и репресиите над македонските българи в продължение на десетилетия.
Многу збореше, ништо не кажа. Ама да објаснам колку фаули направи тука Радев. Прво, не одговара никако на прозивката за неизвинувањето на бугарската држава во геноцидот, односно депортацијата на евреите од Македонија и Тракија во смртта во Треблинка. Второ, се обидува да ги изедначи Холокаустот, во кој ја негира улогата на Бугарија и измислените репресии врз бугари во Македонија по Втората светска војна. Многу бла 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 бла, многу не си ја знаете историјата, а немаше воопшто суштина во неговиот одговор. Може би затоа што бугарските евреи не му откажа учество во прославата на 80 години од спасувањето на бугарските евреи, токму поради негирањето на Холокаустот, односно улогата на тогашната бугарска држава во депортацијата на македонските евреи. Но, кабает не испадна само Румен Радев.
Се огласи и ко-председателот на Македонско-бугарската комисија за ревидирање на историјата Ангел Димитров.
Така да се зборува за Бугарија е крајно неприфатливо, дури и неточно од страна на политичар со огромна одговорност, чија цел треба да биде воспоставување добри дипломатски односи меѓу нашите две земји.
Еве го и шефот на историчарите, Ангел Димитров. И за него било недозволиво и неприфатливо вака да се прозива Бугарија за улогата во депортацијата на евреите од Македонија. Океј, ајде да видиме што и другите историчари велат за тоа. Например, да го прашаме овој Ангел Димитров, ама од пред 2 години.
Но тъмната страничка е това, което се случва с евреите от Беломорието и от Вардарска Македония. България носи част от вината, това е неизбежно, но тази вина е несъответна, крайно несъответна на усилията да бъде атакувана страната днес, нали, и да бъде обвинявана едва ли не като инициатор и желала това депортирането на евреите.
Парадокс.
Ете, тогаш Ангел Димитров неволно вели дека носела тогашната бугарска држава дел од вината, неизбежно, но дека била несразмерно помала од онаа на германските фашисти. Добро де, и извинувањето нека е несразмерно помало, ама да не ја нарекувате темната страничка на историјата. Океј? Еве уште еден историчар од истиот тим на истата тема.
Въпрос, защо непрекъснато се говори за темата, дали ние ги спасяваме, дали ние сме виновни. Значи ние сме историци, ние констатираме нещата каквито са били. Да, нашите власти са участници на германците. По какви причини, това е отделен въпрос. Нали, защо те се дезинтересират, също отделен въпрос. Има огромна отговорност и тя е на гърба на Богдан Филов. Значи истината е това. Ако той няма някаква друга отговорност, това е истината.
Ете, тешко ни заби, ама ќе се извлече некој заклучок, лека по лека. Сега да адресираме една сродна тема. Според Радев и екипата, во Македонија немало ни окупација од Бугарија во Втората светска војна, туку што би рекол нивниот Пулен Заев имало администрација. И повторно из ова прашање да се обратиме кај бугарските историчари. Окупација или администрация?
От гледна точка на международното право, това, което се случва, се нарича наистина окупация в всички съседни територии, на които навлиза българската войска. В кореспонденцията между българските политици и в българската архивна документация, то също така се води като окупация. Във военната документация на българската армия се води като окупация. По време на сключването на парижките договори 1947 година се представя като окупация. Единствено в официалната пропаганда това е освобождение и национално обединение.
Ете и тоа го решивме. Конечно, зошто ја окупирале Македонија? Дали Хитлер ги натерал? Дали германците пиштол на глава им ставиле и им рекле ајде влегувајте, мора да влезете да ја окупирате Македонија? Вие се чудите и се смеете, ама ова го тврдат нивни историчари кога сакаат да бегаат од темата на фашизмот. Дека тие морале, едноставно биле натерани и не по своја волја правеле се што ќе им кажат германците и затоа влегле во Македонија. Дали е и тоа така?
Това, че Македония стои на дневен ред, тя стои на дневен ред. Филов каза, това бих искал просто да свърша да го черпаме това въпрос, защото много се спекулира. Филов казва на германските генерали на 15 април 1941 година, пуснете ни да влеземе по-бързо, 60 години чакаме това нещо, не можем ние, това е голямото събитие на нашето поколение, не можем ние да го оставим неразрешено. Значи имайте предвид какъв е въпрос.
Вау! Богдан Филов, премиерот на Бугарија во време на профашистичката влада, пишувал писма дека едва и чекаат да влезат во Македонија. Ги молел да ги пуштат да влезат во Македонија, бидејќи 60 години го сунувале тој ден. И откако влегоа, како сублимат, ајде да се подсетиме што зборуваа во нивниот парламент. Истиот Богдан Филов, уште еднаш, директно од Собранието на Република Бугарија.
Целият български народ вижда днес да се осъществяват неговите идеали за създаването на една мощна и обединена България, от Дунав до Бяло море и от Охрид до Черно море. българският народ ще изпитва завинаги най-голяма благодарност и дълбока признателност към силите от оста и към техните големи водачи Адолф Хитлер и Бенито Мусолини, които осъществиха обединението на България.
Мислам дека темата ја затворивме барем кога фактите се во прашање. А кога е во прашање лудилото, тогаш и кражба на монитор може да се смета за напад кон државата.
Дојде и крадењето на монитор во бугарскиот клуб во Скопје, каде воедно беа ограбени и два угостителски објекта. Ама за Јотова тоа било напад врз бугарската држава и требало соодветно да се реагира.
И последно задавам един риторичен въпрос. Дали върховният представител за външна политика господин Борел, който предприе обиколка в Албания и тези дни в Република Северна Македония, както и комисаря по разширяване господин Вархей, ще бъдат запознати с това, че вандалски беше нападнат културния институт на България, на европейска държава, държа да подчертая, държава член на Европейския съюз, официалния културен институт, и какъв ще бъде отговор от страна на европейските институции.
Дојде и крадењето на монитор во бугарскиот клуб во Скопје, каде воедно беа ограбени и два угостителски објекта. Ама за Јотова тоа било напад врз бугарската држава и требало соодветно да се реагира. Крадењето на монитор.
Но ние не сме должни да се поведуваме по тугите лудила, туку да ги именуваме со вистинското име. За таа цел вечерва ви најавувам многу интересно интервју со човекот кој е најпознатиот ловец на нацисти во светот во моментот. Доктор Ефраим Зуроф гостува во вечерното шоу. Уживајте. Разговорот во студио продолжува со мојот специјален вечерашен гостин, како што ви најавив. Тоа е господинот Ефраим Зуров, директор на Симон Визентал центарот. Човек кој што има една професија со која што се бави во својот живот, ловец на нацисти или на англиски Nazi Hunter, нешто што вака на визит карта сигурно изгледа монументално, но тоа е животна приказна која што е преполна со најразлични доживувања, преживувања, и ние вечерва ќе разговараме за многу сериозни теми, за неговата работа, за неговото искуство и нешто поврзано и со за жал актуелните прашања во македонската политичка реалност и односите со соседите, конкретно со Бугарија. Mr. Zurov, welcome. Thank you.
Dr. Zurov.
Dr. Zurov, sorry, Dr. Zurov. Welcome. Thank you for accepting the offer on such a short notice to come to our TV, to my show, to have a chance to talk with you on this short travel to Macedonia for you. We are pre-recording this interview on the day of the commemoration of on 80 years of the deportation of the Macedonian Jews. So, what's the meaning of this day and these events which occur all around the world for the generations? For instance, I have two small kids, a daughter of 2.5 years, son of 10 months. Is it important, very important, to save this memory and this tradition, so never in the future history of the world to have an events like those that occurred, unfortunately, 80 years ago?
Well, you just answered your own question.
That's my style.
In other words,
yeah, you just need to say yeah.
The reason that this event is very important is we all hope that there never will be an event of the scope and the nature of the Holocaust. And that's why we insist that the victims be commemorated, the perpetrators be identified, and until now there's still a chance to bring some of those perpetrators to justice, but that will not be possible in another 2 to 3 or 5 years.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, so I devoted a good part of my life to trying to facilitate the prosecution of Nazi war criminals. And for various reasons, actually quite a few of the people that I was involved in the cases were people who committed crimes in the Balkans. So I feel very close, in a sense, to these communities, these Jewish communities, and to those events. And I was actually enlisted by the Jewish community of Macedonia to try and help them pass a law which would make it illegal to build institutions, cultural, religious institutions, which promote Nazism, anti-Semitism, discrimination, etc. And Rachel Mizrahi submitted this proposed legislation to the parliament, and she had the feeling that it would not pass. And apparently she turned to quite a few Jewish organizations and other organizations, and no one wanted to help her. And I said, I'll be more than happy to help you, because for the last 15, 20 years, I have been extremely active in trying to combat a phenomenon that we call Holocaust distortion. In other words, we're not talking about people or countries or governments that deny that the Holocaust took place. We're talking about governments, people who changed the narrative of the Holocaust and basically try to hide the guilt and the participation of their own nationals in the crimes of the Holocaust.
You had strong words in your statement today for the national televisions, Alpha and the other national televisions, regarding the Bulgaria's point of view regarding the Macedonian Jews and the Jews from Thrace and the Aegean part of Macedonia and Pirot. But you mentioned the law which was passed a couple of months ago in Macedonia. Are you aware that maybe a month ago in Bulgaria their parliament brought a declaration regarding Macedonia, in which one point in that declaration is that they note that Macedonia created a law which is repressionist towards the Bulgarians in Macedonia, even though in the law there is not a single word, there is not the letter B in the law. It's against the use of the names of Nazis, fascists, collaborators of the Third Reich, etc. And it's only a reaction because, you know, of the cultural club called Tsar Boris III in Ohrid, or Vancho Mikhailov, another one, fascist collaborator. Right. And the Bulgarian state says that that law is anti-Bulgarian. It creates repression towards Bulgarians. What can you say about that?
I could say that that's a desperate attempt to whitewash the crimes of the Bulgarian occupation. That's simply just you could say a knee-jerk response, trying to do anything possible to deflect attention from the guilt of the Bulgarians. The Bulgarians are the ones who carried out the deportations. They were the ruling party, the ruling government, in a sense, in Macedonia during that period, and they did it. Now, the irony of the story is that Bulgaria actually stands out in certain respects because they saved their own Jews. And they actually, I know that they asked to be declared a country of saving.
The righteous.
Right. In other words, we have righteous among the nations, right, individuals. They want to be called a country of righteous among the nations. And the fact that they saved their Jewish community is a wonderful thing. And there are people in Bulgaria who deserve our eternal admiration and thanks. Dmitry Peshev, Deputy Speaker of the Parliament, Patriarch Metropolitan Stefan, Metropolitan Cyril. These are wonderful people. They did a great thing, a miracle. 50,000 Jews were saved from being sent to Treblinka. But that doesn't mean that they can cover up their crimes in Macedonia, in Thrace, in Pirot, which is a terrible act of complicity with the Nazis, and which led to the mass murder of 11,000, I think it's 343 Jews, who were murdered simply because they were Jews.
Another thing, they never mention that they speaking of the laws which we have in Macedonia or in Bulgaria, in 1941 they created this law for the saving of the nation, which was a law directly against the Jewish
population.
The Jewish population. Sure. People were marked with the yellow stars. They needed to make a list of all their ownings. They need to pay special taxes. They were kind of living in a ghetto. Yeah. So, but our point of view, I mean, not Macedonian, my point of view, let's say like that, is that Bulgaria entered the Second World War. They say they were forced into it, that somebody forced them. They must, like anti-fascism never existed, so they must make Hitler and Mussolini their ally. But Macedonia was always on their minds in the past 150 years, and maybe nowadays they're trying to deny their atrocities here. Not just towards Jews. 25,000 partisans from Macedonia died in that war against the fascists and the Nazis. But they're trying to deny their role because they never want to be seen here as occupators, which they were, but as the liberators, or you've said it good, whitewashing the history. But have you visited Bulgaria and talked with people there?
I have to tell you something. It's a little strange. Bulgaria is the only country in Europe which I have never visited. And ironically enough, after the commemoration in Pirot on Monday, I'm going to Bulgaria for the first time ever. But I spoke today to one of the leaders of the Jewish community in Bulgaria, who came to participate in the ceremony, Solomon Bali, and we discussed the whole issue. And I was very curious to know the position of the Jewish community of Bulgaria. And he told me that most of the Jews in Bulgaria support the truth, not the fake narrative that the Bulgarians had nothing to do with this. But part of the problem is that that Israel has not spoken out on this and is not doesn't want to take a stance when, in effect, you would expect Israel, which sees itself as the heir of the victims and the protector of their memory and their legacy, to do this. And it hurts me, I have to say personally. I'm an Israeli by choice. I lived in the United States. I grew up in the United States. No one kicked me out of the United States. There was no anti-Semitism in those days, or virtually no anti-Semitism that I encountered in the United States. I came because I wanted to live in a Jewish country. And Jews, for thousands of years, actually prayed that they would have a country of their own, and thank God that happened in 1948. And I wanted to be part of that. So that means, why was our fate so terrible, the fate of the Jews during World War II? Because there was no country for whom to save Jews was a priority.
And nowadays you do have the...
And nowadays we have that country. And we're being threatened by Iran, who wanted to destroy us. But we were able to defend ourselves.
You're born a couple of months after the foundation of Israel, 1948. You were born in the States, in New York, and I've read you've moved to Israel in 1970.
Correct.
Right? So,
correct.
What was the first time at what age you've learned about the history of your people? About how did that affect you? Did you decide that you'll fight for your people, for the right of the people, for saving the memory and fighting for the truth?
First of all, it's very clear that Israel made it a priority to fight for the memory of the Holocaust, and that's exactly what we would expect from Israel. But the problem is now that politics have a very nasty way of interfering with the truth. And as a result, because of there was a certain strategy taken by Prime Minister Netanyahu during the time that he was Prime Minister, and again he's now Prime Minister, that he wanted to create a wedge between the countries of Western Europe who are members of the European Union and are obsessed with the Palestinians, and the countries of Eastern Europe who couldn't care less about the Palestinians. And in a sense, he was trying to gain their support because, as I said, they were not concerned about the fate of the Palestinians, which was for us is a very cardinal issue. But I have to say, you don't do that, or you shouldn't do that at the price of, in a sense, not defending the dignity of the victims, not identifying the perpetrators, and letting little countries, like the Baltic countries, for example, where the number of Jews murdered was over 90%, and most of those murders were carried out by the locals. And you know, you treat them as if they're the United States of America, the ally that you need more than anybody else, or Germany in Europe. Doesn't make any sense.
Your career description is Nazi hunter. That's what I said. You understood me while I opened the show in Macedonian. Can you tell me, was your life ever endangered, I mean directly, while doing your job?
Listen, first of all, I was nearly killed in the army in Israel when a Palestinian terrorist happened to infiltrate the base that I was on, and he killed my commanding officer, and thank God he didn't kill any of the other people on the base. So that was a lot more dangerous. But I mean, if you include comments on the internet, there were quite a few people who would like to see me dead, okay, especially in Eastern Europe, in the countries where I'm actively trying to get them to bring their Nazis to justice, and now in recent years to fight against the lies that they chose for the new narrative.
Has your life ever been similar to movies which we watched about the...
Listen, I would say if I were a little more successful, maybe it would be more like the movies. But the job itself is a very frustrating job and a very difficult job, because in many countries there's no political will to bring these people to justice. And they know that all they have to, the countries want to avoid the embarrassment and the cost and the whole chaos of these trials that are created and the bad reputation that they get.
Is that the only reason?
These trials are not popular in many countries. If you take Lithuania, for example, Lithuania, where 96.4% of the Jews were murdered, almost a big majority by the Lithuanians themselves, and quite a few of the criminals who ran away to America were stripped of their American citizenship, and they were deported, and they went back to Lithuania. For many of the Lithuanians, these people were heroes. They were helping the Nazis, and they were helping getting rid of the Jews. And now they came back home because they had run away from the communists. Mm-hmm. But they should have been put on trial. And the Lithuanian government did everything possible to turn the whole judicial process, instead of being a lesson in history for Lithuanian society, it turned into a total farce. So, for example, there were 3 trials, and those trials were all carried out under heavy pressure from the United States and from Israel. This is in the early years of independence. And these people were major criminals. Alexandras Leleikis, who was the head of the Lithuanian security in Vilnius, who had a staff of 100 men under him who guarded the Vilna ghetto, prevented people from escaping, prevented Lithuanian righteous among the nations from helping Jews. They took those people, Jews from those ghettos, that there were 2, and they brought them to be murdered in Ponar. Now, when he arrived in Lithuania, after being stripped of his American citizenship. He wasn't arrested. They didn't bother him until pressure forced them to put him on trial, by which time he was already not that well, and the Lithuanian government had passed 3 laws which don't exist in any other country in the world. You can investigate a genocide suspect even if they're not medically fit. You can indict a genocide suspect even if they're not medically fit. You can have a trial by video from a hospital bed, okay? Now, they didn't even ask him or obligate him to appear at the trial itself. One day, he appeared at the trial because he did it by his own volition. And instead of the court, the judge, reading the accusation against him, which is the first thing you do in a criminal trial, they asked him, Mr. Lelakis, do you have anything to say? He said, yes, I did it for my country. And he had a heart attack on the spot.
Really?
Yes.
It was the last trial? I mean, the last session, or he survived?
It was the first session that he was there. And he later wasn't convicted because the trial ended because of health reasons.
Sorry for this comment, but Adolf Hitler could say that he did it for his country. That does not mean that he did not kill millions.
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly the point. Stalin, the same Stalin could say.
Interesting topic. What do you think about, let's say, in Bulgaria, they're trying to put an equation between the Nazism and fascism and communism, like leveling the atrocities which were
equating them.
Yes, equating them.
Okay, this is a very serious problem, because it's true that communist crimes were absolutely terrible. It's true that millions suffered, were murdered, and had terrible things done to them. But never were communist crimes genocide. Genocide means a plan, an intention to destroy a people. Listen, even the Holodomor, which was the famine that Stalin launched because he wanted to force all the kulaks, the farmers, small farmers, to join the kolkhoz, it wasn't directed against Ukrainians. There were Belarusian farmers who suffered, Jewish farmers who suffered, and there was never an attempt to wipe out a people. Besides that, there was never any industrialized mass murder employed by the Soviet regime. So those are the two characteristics that separate communist crimes from Nazi crimes. But these countries are determined to focus attention on their suffering at the hands of the communists, and the occupation, was much longer than the Nazi occupation, and deflect attention from their collaboration with the Nazis, the crimes that they committed. If a country has a choice between being a country of perpetrators or being a country of victims, it's a no-brainer. Of course they want to be victims. Sympathy, assistance, support.
What were the biggest obstacles you've come along the way hunting Nazis all over the world, except some countries defending their heroes, not willing to face the facts and maybe change some parts of their history? I mean, we have that problem with Bulgaria and their Tsar Boris III.
Right, sure.
Whose name appeared in Ohrid. I'm from Ohrid. It's my hometown. Appeared at the name of a cultural club. That's what they named it. He's the guy who ordered the deportation of the Jews from Macedonia. He's the guy who occupied Macedonians, and Macedonian partisans fought against the armies of the Bulgarians, the Germans, the Italians, etc. So they have this problem of eliminating Boris III from the righteous part of their history. And what they say to us? When you say Bulgarian fascist occupators, do you tell the Germans the German fascist occupators? like, is it Kazan Bulgarian type of thing that we hate them? We hate them because we want to hate them, not because of the troubles between us and the unsettled issues which affect deeply the Macedonian society. What type of obstacles have you encountered during your work, and what do you think it's possible? You'll go to Bulgaria in a couple of days. Yeah, if they watch your appearance on Macedonian televisions,
maybe they'll stop me at the border.
They won't stop you. You're an American citizen, but maybe the media won't be that friendly or anxious to.
I don't think they want to speak to me. I'm going to tell them things that they'll find very unpleasant.
What will you tell them regarding their position in the question of Macedonian Jews?
It's very simple. You know, I'm tempted to say, grow up, okay? Take responsibility. You're responsible. You committed the crime. Take responsibility for the crime, and believe me, it'll be much better off for you. In other words, until you do that, there's like a black shadow hanging over your country. And I know, let's say, I see in Lithuania, for example, when they got independence, they were 3.5 million people. Today, there's 2.3 million people. The country is emptying out. Latvia, the same. They never admit their crimes. I'll tell you an interesting story. There was a monument that was, you know, during the Soviet times, all the monuments basically said to the victims of fascism. They didn't identify the victims, and they didn't identify the perpetrators. Okay, so when Lithuania became independent, Ponar was the mass murder site of the Jews of Vilna. 70,000 Jews murdered there, including my great-uncle, who I'm named for. And they built a new, beautiful monument in 4 languages: Lithuanian, Russian, Hebrew, and Yiddish. Okay? So the dedication, at the dedication, the Prime Minister of Lithuania gave a speech, Gediminas Vagnorius, in which he said that the misdeeds of a few criminal elements, socially rejected people, can't ruin the reputation of a country where so much was done to help the Jews. Oh, that's very interesting. Where are those Jews whom the Lithuanians helped? They're still in Lithuania, but they're 6 feet under. They're in graves, in mass graves. Fast forward 32 years, okay? There was a vandalization of the monuments at Ponar. Someone, we don't know who did it actually, painted the letters V and Z on the monuments. Now, the letters V and Z are what the Russians painted on their tanks when they invaded Ukraine. Yeah. And it seems like it's trying to say that the Jews in Lithuania, and there are hardly any Jews left, support the Russians against Ukraine. And in any event, the Prime Minister, Šimonytė, issued a statement about this event, about the vandalization. He said the vandalization, you know, obviously Ponar is one of the most tragic chapters in the history of Lithuania. The Nazis and others killed the Jews. Now that's very interesting. Who are those others? Maybe they were Martians who came in a spaceship, murdered the Jews, and then went back to Mars.
Yeah,
so they couldn't be caught.
Probably.
You understand, 32 years have passed, and they can't say the words, we Lithuanians were active participants in the mass murder of our Jewish neighbors. We played a significant role. Without our participation, nowhere near the number of Jews who were murdered would have been murdered.
Is Nazism alive in the world today?
Listen, there are pockets of Nazism, or what we call neo-Nazism, even in the Western world, in the United States, in places like Australia and other places. But so far, at this point, it's still marginal. It's still marginal. It's like Holocaust denial. Today, there is no normative political party, social organization in the Western world, that actually promotes Holocaust denial. Now, part of this is the trial of David Irving in London after he accused Deborah Lipstadt, who is a Jewish scholar. Today she's the representative of the United States to fight against anti-Semitism, of accusing her of saying that he was a Holocaust denier. And the court proved conclusively that he was a Holocaust denier, and he was the most dangerous Holocaust denier because he started as a legitimate historian, and then he became a denier. He was very eloquent, very charismatic, and a true threat in that respect.
I
and
understand.
What the prosecution did was absolutely brilliant, I'm telling you.
What?
They brought a whole bunch of non-Jewish history professors from Cambridge and Oxford to prove unequivocally that David Irving was a denier of the Holocaust. And they ripped him to shreds. They totally delegitimized him. But of course, the issue of Holocaust denial is alive and well in Iran, in the Muslim world, in the Arab world, where there's no Holocaust education. There's a deep tradition of anti-Semitism, no education about the Jewish people, their contribution to the world, etc. So this is a real challenge. This is one of the challenges of the 21st century.
Are you afraid that it might lead to something else? It might lead to I don't even want to say it, but to that at one point this planet will relive days like that if those small reflections of Nazism and fascism throughout the world are not exterminated thoroughly.
Listen, they're not a major threat at this point. I mean, it's very unpleasant when people are attacked for being Jews or for being, other people from minorities and that. It's very painful and it never should happen. But we're talking about, in order to carry out the tragedy of the scope of the Holocaust, you need a lot of power and a lot of ability. That's what the Germans had. That's what the Nazis have. The only reason Israel has not been destroyed is that our enemies don't have the ability and they don't have the power and the brains to do it. So I'll give you a simple example. Hamas, the Islamic movement in Gaza, openly say they want to destroy Israel. They shoot thousands of rockets at civilian centers, right? Only one problem. We have a defense that protects our people from those rockets. If it were up to Arafat, in the days that Arafat led the PLO, he would have destroyed Israel. He would have killed all the Jews. He just didn't have the ability and the power. And we have the power, thank God, to defend ourselves. So we still face existential threats. But thank God we've been able to protect ourselves.
Can you share some stories from the survivors you've met throughout your life? Stories about I mean, do people ever overcome the tragic past, the tragedy, the heartbreak? How? I'm not aware of your family's story. I'm sure you have in your family history ancestors who unfortunately died in the Holocaust.
Listen, I have some.
How do you live with it?
I have some, but until recently, I would say that it wasn't a major factor. To be honest, my parents were born in America. They're not survivors. Yeah. And the Holocaust was not a subject in our house. And the fact that my great-uncle, my mother's uncle, had been murdered with his wife and 2 kids in Vilna, in Lithuania, was not an issue for us for some reason. People in the 50s and the 60s, when I was growing up in the 70s, did not want to talk about the Holocaust. It was not a subject of any, it wasn't a dominant subject in our home, and we were very identified Jews, very committed Jews. My father was a rabbi, principal of a Jewish high school. My grandfather was one of the people who created a Jewish university called Yeshiva University in New York City. And for them, the fact that my uncle had been a brilliant Talmud scholar was more important than the fact of his fate, and they didn't even know how it happened to him and when it happened to him. One of the things that I was able to do, and I'm very proud of that, was to find out how he was murdered and by whom. Not exactly the names. I don't know the names of the people, but I know that he was seized by a gang of Lithuanian vigilantes who were roaming the streets of Vilnius on July 13th, 1941, and looking for Jews with beards to murder, and he was one of them. But I don't know what happened to how his wife and his 2 children were murdered, for example.
Was that history hidden, or it was too hard, too soon to talk about that? Or you weren't aware of the magnitude? I mean...
Too soon to talk about it. People wanted to forget about the Holocaust in the 50s and 60s. And I'll tell you something that I feel very strongly from my knowledge of the career and the history of Simon Wiesenthal. You know, our organization is named for Simon Wiesenthal, the great Nazi hunter, the most important Nazi hunter. And in my opinion, I might be wrong, in my opinion, the thing that most worried Simon Wiesenthal was not that he didn't catch Nazi X or Y. The thing that most worried him was that the Holocaust will be forgotten. Now, but it's because of people like Simon Wiesenthal and Elie Wiesel to an extent, okay, who kept alive the memory of the Holocaust and emphasized its importance. They basically were able to keep the subject alive until another generation was born, a 3rd generation came along that didn't have all the complexes and the problems of being either survivors or children of survivors, and they came with curiosity and they came with a desire to learn. And look at how much has been written about the Holocaust since the 70s. How many TV programs, how many films, how many plays, how many books have been written. There's no danger at this moment that the Holocaust will be forgotten.
But we started this talk with your comment on the strategy for distorting the Holocaust, not denying, but to create a distortion of the entire picture. Was that one of the most surprising discoveries you've encountered while working as a Nazi hunter?
That this has been, I have to say, the major disappointment of my life. That this whole Holocaust distortion all of a sudden has risen its head, you could say, all of a sudden has become something very, very problematic. It is a threat to Holocaust education, it's a threat to Holocaust history, it's a threat to Holocaust commemoration and research. And it, to a certain extent, undermines the whole efforts of people all over the world to make sure the Holocaust will not be forgotten and that the correct history will be recorded and written in stone. Something that can't be erased.
How do you cope personally with your feelings and emotions doing what you do?
First of all, I try and do whatever I can to defeat it. So I have a book about the Holocaust in Lithuania, which I wrote with a Lithuanian author who discovered that our family was involved. The book is called Our People, Discovering Lithuania's Hidden Holocaust. And we're trying now to, it's already been published in 8 languages, and we're trying now to get it in Serbian. And we're working on that, and in other languages, in other countries. And this is one of the tools that we use to educate people. And it took someone who was brave, who admitted that her family was involved and she wanted to atone for it, Ruta Vanagaita. and to actually do it. And she became like a pariah in Lithuania because she told the truth. Now, there are 3 films out in the last 6 months, 3 documentaries about the cover-up of Holocaust crimes in Lithuania. 3 already in 6 months. One is about Latvia and Lithuania, the other 2 about Lithuania. So these are also tools to be used to fight against the lies. The interesting thing about our book was that it was a bestseller in Lithuania, 20,000 copies. But who read it? The people who lived through the war read it, and the young people who grew up in the EU read it. The middle generation, 25 to 65, didn't want to read it at any cost. They were afraid it would ruin their grasp
idea
of what had happened.
Yeah.
Of what had happened.
While you talk about Lithuania, I'm only willing for you to find an inspiration in this, in the Bulgarian narrative, because it's not something you haven't seen before. You
No,
mentioned,
of course.
You mentioned earlier, but maybe a couple of more books.
Listen, I
could
promised Rachel Mizrahi that I would do whatever I could as the director for Eastern Europe of Simon Wiesenthal Center to protect the narrative, the correct narrative of the Holocaust, and make sure that people understand who the perpetrators were, who the victims were, and the results of those terrible crimes.
Because part of the same lie, that false narrative, is that I'm talking now from a point of view of one Macedonian, that they weren't the occupators in the Second World War, they were administrators of this territory.
That's what they claim.
Yes, they claim that only because Hitler put a gun on their head and said, you must go and occupy Macedonia, etc. Tell me, have you ever had some ethical dilemma while you fight for the justice of the Jewish people and remembering the Holocaust and hunting Nazis, and hence the accused ones also have some rights, like
rights,
like human beings, right, for a fair trial.
They have rights for a fair trial, but they also have the right to be accused of the crimes.
Let me rephrase that. Have you ever thought of someone that maybe some people don't even deserve a trial? Because
the only problem that I faced was there's a specific case in which we thought we might have identified a woman who smashed the heads of Jewish babies in 1941 in Lithuania, or smashed them with a boulder. And we thought we found her. But the testimony that related those crimes, about those crimes, did not supply a full name. It only supplied a last name, a family name, and we were trying desperately to try and find out if a woman by that name who was found alive in Canada was actually the person who had done that. And we have not been able to do so. And it's an enormous frustration, because we want to send a message. You smashed the heads of Jewish babies and murdered them. Even 80 years later, we'll look for you and try and hold you accountable.
A couple of months ago, there was this lady over 100 years ago who was...
No, she wasn't. That's somewhere in 97.
97?
No, but there was another case that I was very involved in, of a guard in Sachsenhausen camp who at the age of 101 was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. And now he appealed. But the funniest thing about this trial, the oddest thing, I have to say, sometimes things happen that you never understand how they happen. One of the things that helped convict that person was a letter that was found in a Moscow archives, written by his parents.
Wow.
Who wrote to some friends that our son is with the SS in Oranienburg, and he denied even being there. Oranienburg was Sachsenhausen.
Yeah.
That was the concentration camp.
You're thorough, and that's why, I mean, you and...
I wasn't the person who found the letter, but it was absolutely amazing. And why hadn't he been put on trial in East Germany? He was living in East Germany. Because his daughter won an Olympic medal.
Wow. So that erased his...
Ostensibly erased his crime.
His crime. I truly admire your work, even though the time will finish what you haven't finished, and the last surviving criminals who were part of the Holocaust will not be amongst us in couple of years' time.
That's why we called our project Operation Last Chance.
Yeah.
In other words, we offered money in return for information. So, but it's the last chance to do it, actually.
Even though the efforts themselves send a strong message to everybody on how one should act, defending his people, his pride, his dignity, his right to...
But I want to tell you something. Keep in mind, every time we catch someone and they're put on trial, every other Nazi who's alive wonders whether one day there'll be a knock on the door and someone will say, "You were Dinko Shakic, you were the commandant of Jasenovac."
What's your position? We're finishing the interview. I know you have many more obligations, but what's your position on using the term denazification in the war between Russia and Ukraine?
Listen, the lies are on both sides. Both sides are lying, and they're both using the Holocaust to try and advance their own cause. So Putin's statement of February 24th, 2022, that they're invading Ukraine to denazify the country, is a ridiculous statement, because the country is not a Nazi country. What is true is that the main heroes of Ukraine and the people who've been turned into national heroes are people who murdered Jews with the Nazis.
Like
That's Bandera and Shoshkevich. Okay?
It's similar like Lithuania and Latvia and the countries in the Eastern Bloc.
Exactly. On the other hand, when the head of the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, says that Bucha is the Holocaust of this time, 4 streets in the Warsaw Ghetto were worse than what happened in Bucha. So everyone, listen, in a certain sense, this is a backhanded compliment. In other words, it proves that we've convinced the world that the worst tragedy in the annals of mankind has been the Holocaust. So now everyone wants to say that their cause is the Holocaust. And in many cases, in most cases, it's not even accurate. So that's the downside of our success, in a sense.
Yeah, I understand. Last question. What would you send as a message to Macedonians living here? We are very fond of the Jewish community in Macedonia. Yeah, we have the MP, Mr. Rachela Mizrahi. We have the Memorial Center of the Holocaust. I think it was built 10, 11 years ago, something like that.
We just went through it, my wife and I, Ilana, and it's, I think, one of the best Holocaust museums in the world.
Wow, really?
It is. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And it just so happens that my friends, Michael Birnbaum and Eddie Jacobs, are the ones who did it.
In other
words, they're close friends of mine, both of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Ah, bravo.
Yeah. Especially Michael.
So I guess you're satisfied of
I think
Macedonian
they did
society.
A fantastic job. It's educational. It's intriguing. It's engaging. It's interesting. I tell you, I walked out of there. I didn't know what to expect when I walked in, and this is my first visit to the museum. But we walked out, both of us, enchanted.
And as a historian and as a fighter for the truth, your entire life basically you've been and the justice you've been doing that.
It used to be justice. Now it's justice and the truth.
What message would you send to the people watching us tonight regarding our fight for our own truth?
I would say that the truth ultimately always wins out. Okay, it might take a long time, it might be a difficult struggle, but I urge the people of Macedonia to stand up for the truth and never give up the fight to make sure that it's the truth that's inscribed in stone in the history of Macedonia.
It's a pleasure to have an ally like you in our struggle, and it's a pleasure for us to be an ally to you in the mission to spread the truth and fight for justice. Dr. Efraim Zurov, thank you very much for your honoring this show, the late night show in Alpha Television, and I hope you'll be back in Macedonia for a longer period of time, and we can
the
talk on and on.
President said he wants to invite me back, so maybe I will come back soon.
I hope he will. He knows he changes his mind often, but in your case, I think it won't be the case, and I hope Mr. Pendarovski will stand his ground and invite you. If not him, there are other people here who would like to see you again. Okay. Thank you once again.
Listen, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity to explain in greater detail what sometimes can't be conveyed in a short news interview. Because people have to understand the difference between denial and distortion, and understand why and how it's a danger, a serious danger to the future of Holocaust memory.
I agree in total with what you've said, and also it's very dangerous method for any question which is for any topic in question, because it's part of a propaganda, and we need to look in the eyes of the propaganda.
Fight for your rights. Fight for the truth. You're a small people, and you have to fight. I'm telling you, and don't give in to bullies like the Bulgarians.
Thank you very much. I hope you'll have a great stay in Bulgaria in a couple of days. If not,
it will be very short, believe me.
You have my number. This show is open for you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Take care.
Welcome.
Ова беше разговорот со доктор Ефраим Зуроф. Навистина ми направи чест што дојде во вечерното шоу. Се надевам дека ви беше интересно, барем интересно од аспект да слушнете работи што сте немале прилика досега да ги слушнете, да слушнете како зборува еден голем борец за неговата кауза и што има тој да ни порача на сите нас на крај на денот. Уште еднаш од мене искрена благодарност до доктор Ефраим Зуров, до еврејската заедница во Македонија, до Рашела Мизрахи која што ме поврза со господинот Зуров на денот кога се одбележува 80 години од депортацијата на евреите од Македонија, Тракија и Егејска Македонија. До следното гледање, стандардна процедура. Гледајте, слушајте, размислувајте, анализирајте и излекувајте сопствени заклучоци. И како што кажа доктор Зуров, борете се за вистината и за правдата секогаш и секаде. На крај тие ќе победат. Добра ноќ, Македонијо, главата горе.